think of you as being on our main stage. And I was going to suggest that we talk mostly about the project with the bike project and the tour, and to think a little about that, and mostly in terms of process, like how did it work to get that approved, and how did the content kind of flow work out, and who on your team was able to do that. But before we do that, can you just remind everyone, for those who haven't heard about it, what it was before Hive Mechanic came into the picture, and then how you changed it once Hive Mechanic was added in?
Sure, yes. Good to see everybody. I'm David Quick, the Adult Services Coordinator at DC Public Library. I've been part of this project since the very beginning. It's always was glad that Ben and his team brought this to us as a kind of advisor from the public library point of view. So it's been really fun to be here from its inception and kind of participate as a public library, but help to kind of think through the ways that this can be a part of public library programming all over the country. So yeah, I was thinking about this, Ben, kind of like, what do I have to say about us? And I was thinking just about the who, what, when, where, and why of DCPL, and connecting those dots to be a part of this project. And the bike tour is a good example of kind of like putting all those pieces together. Every year, DC Public Library does a bike tour during National Bike Month in May, where it's a big group bike ride to various branches around the city. So it's a way to have a fun outdoor active event at a nice time of year that also connects people to different parts of the city through library branches and through bike riding. And it's become kind of an annual tradition that's become very popular. This year though, so in terms of when I was thinking about the who, what, when, where, and why, kind of what are the events that happen every year that you can kind of hang something like this on? What are those things that bring people together and get them thinking about something and playing and moving around? I think, you've been in these trainings with Ben. He's asking you to think about all the kinds of games that can happen, not just not just your old school scavenger hunt, but like what's any kind of playful thing you can do outside together. And so that came to mind through the bike ride for me. And in particular, one of the what's in that who, what, when, where, and why is just DC culture and what's going on in DC. And local DC history is something that's alive for us. Our archival history projects are kind of a core part of our identity, especially since we've reopened our central library. Likewise, kind of, questions around Black history in DC and the big conversation about racism is right in front of us. And particularly, it kind of came to a head recently when we were thinking about renaming our auditorium after Jeff Bezos, because he gave us a bunch of money, and there was a big kerfuffle around that, obviously, because people have a lot of feelings about him, and I won't get into that part. But the question of names of buildings, like why do we name things after people in DC? It was in front of us, and so it occurred to me, like, how could we use the bike ride, and how could we use these little computers that people walk around in, these interactive devices, to highlight buildings in our library system that are named after people in DC. Some of them are named after kind of iconic people, like we have a branch named after Dorothea Hive, who was a civil rights leader and famous Black woman who lived in DC. But then we have a branch named after Watha T. Daniel, who I couldn't even told you who Watha T. Daniel is, but this was an opportunity to do that, have an interactive moment while you're out visiting these branches where you can learn a little bit more. So that was how kind of the ideas and that was the branding for it this year, and that's our logo. So we have our own logo for the event every year. But again, that was kind of what are the things that are in front of us as a library system and as a city that I could connect the Hive Mechanic tool to. So then one of your questions, Ben, is like who can do it? Who can I get to be a champion and an implementer of the project? So, that's in the who category. Like, who are the people that I know are going to be interested in the technology or the history or both? I know that in a lot of these meetings, that's been a question: is are you going to Are you going to latch onto your tech people and your tech nerds who want to, embrace that part of it, or are you going to grab those people who really care about the history? And those are sometimes those groups overlap, but sometimes they don't. I would say among DCPL staff, we have some who are in both, which is a good thing. And, but we have we have one staff member who's at our Woodridge branch who is deeply interested in the history, but the tech is a little harder for him. So that's kind of one of the things to be ready for, is working with someone like that who's really curious about the project, but it's probably going to need a little more hand holding. But we did have a staff member in our makerspace, so we're lucky at DCPL to have a lot of staff who get to work in our labs and are really interested in learning the technology and connecting the public to it. So we have staff who are already I know that they're interested in this kind of thing. And my colleague Biljana, I said, would you be up for trying this specifically around the bike ride? Because she's a cyclist also. So she was ready to roll with it, to pun intended, like she was ready to roll to create a little interactive version of the game that would, whenever you went to one of these branches on the ride or outside of the ride, we did one for every single one of our branches that's named after someone, to when they go and they scan the QR code, it'll tell them a little something about one of these people I just named. And that flyer right there that Ben just brought up, there was one at every single branch that is named after someone. And our central branch here is the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. So obviously that focused on Dr. King. But yeah, I mean, that was the kind of the constellation of ideas and people and places and current events right here in DC that led to one of our first implementations of this tool. And it was, I think, it's okay to say in this context, it may have been a little less juice for the squeeze than we wanted. We know Biljana, she had to learn the tool and then kind of create the content, and then test it and all that. And, I think that was, to what extent we got people really interacting with it. Hopefully it's still up so people can still do it. But, that question I think is going to be at hand for any of you as you try these out, is kind of how do you really get it out there and get people using it. That's one of the pitfalls of doing something around a specific event, is that once the event is done, you may not have a convening moment to get people using it all at once. The day of the bike ride, obviously we got people using it, but yeah. Ben, were there any things you wanted me to touch on in that? I would say the other part of it is that was fun working with Biljana on it, was that, we have folks she's on the tech side in the makerspace, but, we have a people's archive where they have people who are constantly thinking about, who are these people that we've named these buildings after. And so that was a resource and a fun moment for collaboration, where we could say, she's building this kind of tech platform using Hive mechanic, but we can then plug in people who are just doing the archival history, ready to write a little blurb about any one of these people. And that was a fun collaborative moment.
And shout out to some of that process. I wanted just to highlight one thing here in our documentation of it. It's so easy to give the obvious things again and again, but they become a little boring, especially about central content. Everyone knows about MLK, but here, Dr. King is the youngest man to receive the Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 35. However, 5 women have won it at younger ages, right? So that's twisting it up a little bit. It's not just giving the narrow encyclopedia content on who is MLK and what is this branch named after. And I think that that's a little in the playful spirit of this whole project. The goal is actually maybe to go beyond writing the most straightforward, obvious, maybe even sometimes the most important stuff, as we're going to deliver important in the order of importance, but instead to think of that little bit of playfulness. It's to deliver an experience first, and that use the experience to pull them into the most important content. I feel like that's a very slight pivot from just identifying the most important content, but to saying, actually, we're making experiences here. And that was an interesting shift that took us a little while. as we were thinking about the content here, what can make this interesting? Where does it go? I will also say that this was a project that was trying to be kind of as minimal as possible in some ways. You can see there's no fancy sign here. It's just an 8.5 by 11 sheet, right? So we don't need any fancy poster printing. Doesn't even really need to be laminated. If it rained on the day, we could do other things, but just a sheet of paper can launch the project with some text, a little bit more information about each of several sites. This was a deliberately kind of small project, but just to give a little bit of concreteness to what David was saying about it still being the kind of juice from the squeeze. It was still a fair lift for folks to wrap their heads around, well, what does each text message say? Oh, I guess I have to actually write all those text messages. And it took a little bit of like coming back to it every time until they were all written. In the end, it's weird. You look at the list of messages and it doesn't seem like a huge amount of content. So it's not that there were 10 pages written or 5 pages, in terms of actual numbers of words on a page. It's probably like 1 page of content. But I think that what made it feel bigger was that 1 page of content is not in a form that we're used to writing for. So the form feels so different that we're writing it in a series of text messages. And so that's for me, part of why it's so important to try it or try some version of it early so you can get used to the form. Because the biggest barrier in many ways is wrapping your head around form first and then write, because the writing will flow pretty easily once you're like, oh, okay, that's how it's going to work. That we're texting with bikers. Are they on their bike when they're doing this? Did they get off? Do they show it to a friend? Is it like 2 bikers look over a phone together? All of those are things that change with every project. So I think that's some of what we spent a lot of time. We had weekly calls, and maybe this is something we haven't talked about explicitly, is that at some point to make something actually get produced for launch, there has to be regular communication. It can't just be, I passed the Google Doc over once and they did their edits and sent it back. I felt like a key thing, David, see if you agree with this, is when we pivoted from, that's a good idea, we should build that. Yeah, we should. Everyone was kind of nodding for like weeks and weeks and weeks. And then at some point we're like, we got to build this thing. And then we started getting on the phone every week and doing updates. And almost every project like this that I've built have had some of that kind of a regular communication cycle set up with a core team of people. It can be like just 2 people. It could be 4, a small number that are like, well, did anyone go out and try it? How did it go? What do we need to add in? What are the 3 things we need to do? There's kind of a checklist. So it's almost like putting on a little event. You just have like your production committee that meets to get through. And that was a part of the process here as well. On your team, David, for their part, you said that this is someone who has worked in your makerspace. Did you feel like that was a useful thing in them feeling confident coming into the project, or how did their background play into their selection?
Sure. No, I think, part of it is that I've worked here long enough that I kind of like know staff around the system and kind of like what they're interested in and what their strengths are. And so like, Biljana, it was just her place in the labs in our makerspace reflects her interest in technology. During COVID, she was focused a lot of her work on demonstrating just kind of Zoom to seniors, just that, a different kind of engagement around technology through the public library. But, just I know the interest is there, and that learning new technology she has to do in the lab. She has to learn how to do 3D printers, which can take a little bit of programming. And so, I knew the interest was there. I knew she was a bicyclist, so that part of it was interesting to her, as was the kind of the local history, particularly with a focus on social justice, was something that I just know is kind of in her set of values as a librarian. So that was why she came to mind to do it. I will say, even for her comfort level with technology is on the high end among public librarians, and I think it's still, I don't know, there was a learning curve there. It was still kind of a tricky tool for a bit. I don't know if you would agree with that, Ben, but and not like she got discouraged or anything, but like I think for any public library that's going to do this, particularly with members of the public, even for tech confident people, I think there's a kind of a moment of uncertainty and what the heck is this that I'm doing that happens?
I'm so glad you said that, David, because it's something that we're still trying to figure out how to communicate to all the folks participating in the fall cohort. Is it won't always be easy, and that's not a time to feel like you're doing something wrong. That's a time to come and screen share with us. And so there may be something you want to show us, and that's a process that hasn't always felt comfortable for everyone, feeling like they can come and share their screen, and that's how to work on things. But for us, that's the best model we've come up with yet for how to get the coaching to get through a project. So when you get a little bit stuck, come in and screen share. And if the time for office hours or our main trainings doesn't work, drop us an email, because we might be able to arrange another time. This is kind of the benefits of it being a grant. We're interested in providing almost unlimited customer support, a totally unsustainable business model. But we got a grant, right? So we want to see if we can help people build things or get the confidence to do a workshop. So if you need another time, let us know, because I do think that's rather than think of that as something's gone wrong and I can't figure it out, we'd rather frame that as that's a normal part of the learning curve. Let us share screen with you and see if we can't figure it out together. I put the link to the project, by the way, in the chat if anyone wants to check it out. And we should probably pivot over a little bit to having some of those group question and answer discussions. But also I wanted to give people a chance to ask questions of David. Mary or Laura, if Amy, if anyone wants to ask David a question either by voice or if you want to put it in chat, either of those could work. Any questions for doing projects like this, sustainability, etc.?
And I'll just add, while people are maybe thinking of questions, one other piece of that recruitment, Ben, was that we did kind of put out kind of an open call once we were invested in the project to all staff to find staff who were interested. So like, I would guess most libraries do that for new projects, but that was an effective way to, include people, let people know about a new thing and a new partnership that we were doing, and, find people who were interested on any of those levels, from the tech side or the, more of the history content side. And also though, even though, the thing that Biljana built is very fun and cool, and it's good trivia, and it has some of the those nice twists that Ben mentioned. We didn't necessarily get to the point where it was like also kind of interactive, like where somebody could also share, what do they think about these people? There's people who live here in DC who know those people that those buildings are named after. It's part of their own personal history. And so, that would be great to get to the point where we have staff who have that vision of real interactivity and kind of can execute it in a full way. Like we didn't quite get there, but maybe next year at the bike ride, we can build on what we built already.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, one of the lessons is about the kind of breadth versus depth. And I think that you'll always find that content pulls you in a kind of like breadth. We got to cover all these things. We can't just cover MLK. We have to have these other 5 voices. But if you get committed to, we're just going to profile 5 residents because, geez, 5 is so few. But suddenly you're committed to 5, and that means each one of them is like pretty shallow in terms of the interaction. I think in hindsight, it might have been, we would have loved to, instead of cover as many branches as we did, to do just a couple branches, but show a little what the interactivity feels like for an early project. And I think the other thing to go with that is to have planned more for after the bike ride. How might people engage? Because I think it wouldn't have necessarily been that heavy of a lift to have there be a postcard at the branch to say, find out about this branch, and the pivot afterward. So it was a more sustainable project. Wouldn't have been that hard if we'd been planning for that from the beginning, but we had to put all of our energy into we need to get this thing ready for the ride. And so it kind of in some ways wasn't built for sustainability in ways that I think we maybe could have if we hadn't felt so stressed. I'm not sure it would have taken more time. It just would have taken the presence of mind that we were under the gun to finish. Yeah, which is it's totally fine. And I also want to say it's fine to do just something small for the fall and then see where it goes. If you're feeling a little bit of like, how big of a thing should I build? Our goal is always build a thing and then see how ambition feels after that thing is there, where you want to push it. Thanks, David, for your email. Does anyone want, if you don't have a question, it could also be fun to talk through a project idea. Does anyone want to give a little update on their project and talk about it with David for a minute? Mary gave us the one